The time for silence is over. There was once an unprecedented time in American history when common citizens of their day began to define the rights of man and documented how those rights were being violated by their current government. They wrote to each other. They debated with each other. Ultimately, it was these common citizens who recorded these rights for all eternity, and furthermore created a new and free nation founded on these rights with liberty and justice for all of its citizens. Times have changed, but these rights remain.
I don't take responsibility.
That all citizens have the right to life. That all citizens have the right to pursue happiness. That all citizens are created equal. That all citizens have the right to a public trial. That all citizens have the right to peacefully assemble. That all citizens have the right to petition their government. What happens when you try to exercise these rights today? Is this government honoring your rights? Or are they violating them? Is this the government that those citizens aspired to? There is a solution.
I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility. I don't take responsibility.
Join me every Sunday afternoon for a new show where common citizens, you and I together, discuss with each other issues of today, where we demand proof and evidence is required, where we seek the truth and will not be silent. Join me this coming Sunday afternoon and take part in America's oldest and most honored tradition. Hello and welcome everybody to the show. Thank you, James Redacted, for jumping in. Dash Mickey, thank you as always for joining us today. Appreciate you both being here earlier than most. Greatly appreciated. Today we're going to be going over immigration, specifically the crisis, and I will use that word, that's going on at the border right now with tons of children that are currently crossing the border unaccompanied by their parents. I'm also going to be looking into some of the causes, the historic trends that go along with that, and specifically the problem that conservative media is having in addressing this problem right now. Basically the language they are using, the methods they are using, the narrative specifically that they are pushing, and pointing out how and why that is so extremely dangerous. I'm also going to be talking about the differences specifically between the Biden administration and what they're trying to do to address the situation versus the Trump administration and what they did to address / create / exacerbate the situation overall. Furthermore, you can see the donation link today. We have $1 in there as a test. I will be matching donations up to $250 that will be going to rescue.org, which is basically a charity that is extremely highly rated from everything that I could find, that provides services for immigrants after they are finished being processed. Obviously, I cannot do anything to further speed up the processing of immigrants. I can't donate directly to FEMA. I looked at the Red Cross, but unfortunately for what I could find on the Red Cross, there was not a way to donate specifically to the situation at the border. So I picked the best rated charity that I could find. We'll be going over them a little bit as well, what they functionally do and everything else. Apparently, since I am new at the donation thing, the credit card link seems to not be working. However, you can donate via PayPal. That goes through. And like I said, I will be matching donations up to a maximum of $250. So if you donate $250, I'll match the $250. If somebody else donates another $1, I'm done at $250, man. I'm not a rich man. So, James Redacted, can I ask you kind of a weird question? Can I ask you a weird question? Have you ever lived in rural America? I've been writing an article on how rural America has a natural bias towards the right due to geography, history, etc. And I'd love to hear your take, especially on how Democrats can win rural. The chat thing will catch up in a minute. Yes, I have lived in rural America. I actually grew up in rural America, even though I wouldn't consider it very rural anymore outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The town that I grew up in had one stoplight at the time that my family and I moved there, and it had a do-everything store. At that stoplight was the gas station that was also the convenience station that was also the closest thing to a grocery store in town that was also the closest thing to, or it was also a butcher shop. That town has since vastly expanded, but it occurred while I was living there. In terms of how to address why do rural areas tend to lean right currently? A big part of it is Republican messaging on gun control specifically. The Democrats are going to take all of your guns narrative is hugely important in rural areas. And I think people massively underestimate how much that influences rural voters and helps push them more conservative. So that's one. I think that even opening that can of worms can be extremely difficult because I recognize that there's a difference between the way rural voters look at guns and the way urban voters tend to look at guns. So that's number one. The Democrat, Beto O'Rourke, who ran for Congress down in Texas, his, I'm going to come take your AR-15 and take everything. That's not going to play well with rural voters at all. I'm not talking about whether the policy is good or bad, right? But that messaging is a problem. So that would be number one. You need to have much more reasonable messaging than we're going to come and take all of your guns. Number two, rural areas tend to not have as diverse a communities. That's just a reality of the situation. And we know, though I can't give you a source right now, but you can pull it up on Google because I wasn't prepared for the question, so bear with me a little bit. We know that interacting with people of different ethnicities, different religions, different descents will breed familiarity and removes over time a lot of that initial no, they're different, stay away. I don't know how directly you could address that. I would argue that free college education would do a huge part of that, because even if the children went off to college and then came back, they would have experienced much more diversity than they would in their small, isolated rural community that they started in. And again, not all rural communities. Like I said, I grew up in a rural community, but there is a difference between the two. I also think that there needs to be, and I wouldn't know exactly how to push this, but Democrats need to get a hell of a lot better at taking credit for their victories that help rural communities. Infrastructure investment could be huge. A lot of these rural communities are essentially dying now that local manufacturing has, for a lot of them, gone away. Yeah, infrastructure investment would be huge. Specifically, the policy that would come to mind to me would be investing a lot more in broadband internet access across the country, which we did, but a lot of it just got wasted by the telecom companies. But if you had nationwide broadband internet access that allowed somebody to live anywhere and work remotely, then you would see a lot of people in the tech industry, for instance, that live currently in San Francisco, which is insanely expensive to live in, or New York City, or any one of these kind of locations, or Austin, Texas, which is typically very blue for Texas, right? You would see them moving, or at least having the ability to move outside of these areas, right? Because they could work remote at this point, which would bring a tax base potentially, right? Because these people make good money back to these rural communities because the property there is cheaper, right? So if I can, you can just look at the property taxes or the property prices in Texas, which has huge amounts of land, right? Versus versus property cost in LA or New York or San Francisco. It's insanely different. I mean, you can get basically a mansion down in Texas for what you would pay, for a normal, 2-bedroom house in San Francisco. So if you had the infrastructure to allow these people to move and still do their job because they could work remotely, I think that would be huge. And that would further diversify those communities, right? Like I said, familiarity, interaction between people removes a lot of that initial fear motivation. I think investment in education is a big one, right? And I also think that investment in infrastructure to catch these towns that are being hard hit by the movement away from industrial to service economy would be huge. I think those are the two biggest things we could do off the top of my head. And I also think you just need to drop the we're going to come take all your guns rhetoric. I'm not saying you specifically, but the Democrats that are saying that stuff, that messaging is killing voting Democrat in a lot of rural areas, and that's just a reality. I hope that answered your question, James. Dash Mickey, are we talking about what's going on at the border? Are we doing voting rights again? I think I'm going to need to change your stream title. Yeah, change it if it didn't catch it. It should be Crisis at the Border. Donate now. Or Immigration Crisis at the Border. Donate now. And then the date, if it didn't take. I don't know why it didn't take for Twitch. It should be on the other ones. But specifically, to go back to the crisis at the border, we are seeing a surge in unaccompanied children that are trying to immigrate to the United States seeking asylum in most cases. They're coming across without parents, without family units, right? Which is causing an overflow of the facilities that were set up under the Trump administration and the Obama administration before that and the Bush administration before that to be able to handle them. The short version is the difference between the two is the intent and what is being done to fix the problem. Okay. Under President Trump, well, before I dive into that, it's a massive problem. Biden and the Democratic administration need to jump on this. I know they've made some moves already, but hiding it, trying to keep it out of the limelight. I understand not wanting it to distract from a different agenda, but we have thousands, literally, of children in a mess. My understanding is that there's two problems. Okay. Number one, they're supposed to be processed within 72 hours and then transferred out to the Department of Health and Human Services. DHH. There's so many unaccompanied minors that have come across, again, crossed without parents, that the processing is far behind. That's the first problem. The second problem is that these services, such as the charity that I have linked to donate to, and in full disclosure, the donation will go to me and I will make the donation. I will post a receipt when everything is said and done. It's going to be open until next show. So next show, the receipt will be up. But organizations such as the International Rescue Committee weren't prepared to accept this amount of children either. Migration slowed down drastically during the pandemic. And now that a lot of these areas where people are migrating from are in economic decline and seeing increases in violence, it seems that parents are sending their kids and saying, it can't get any worse than it is here. Try to go to America. Good luck. Again, this does not excuse the current situation these children are in, which we'll show some images of and videos of and all that kind of stuff. The difference is in the intent and how they got there. Under President Trump, the intent was, we are going to take anybody that crosses the border. We're going to charge them, arrest them, separate them from their kids, and put the kids in these facilities. So it was intentional. Under President Biden, that's not the case. The kids are coming across without any parents. So they're having to be processed by themselves. Biden does not appear at this current moment in time, based off what I have seen, to be intentionally separating children from parents. They are crossing without parents. Furthermore, instead of leaving the situation as it is, President Biden has called in FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, to help set up additional facilities, additional processing to try and alleviate this concern. Also, as we will show, and this is where I have serious disagreement with the Biden administration, or not disagreement, I think they dropped the ball. This was historically somewhat predictable. But again, we'll jump into that in a minute. Tolstoy, it's a bit sad how the International Rescue Committee has raised a total of $1 so far. How long has it been going? We literally just started about 10 minutes ago, brother, and I agree that it's sad that $1 is the test. They will get a minimum of $2.50. That's what I will be donating personally myself if it comes to that. The stream is eminently reachable. However, if you think it's sad and I think it's sad, feel free to donate, brother. The credit card link does not seem to be working, but PayPal is working just fine. That's what the dollar was testing. So we literally just started, my man. So if you were, from Tolstoy, if you were to hypothetically confronted with accusations of racism or sexual harassment, would you also take intent into account in these cases? I think you must have missed the part where I wasn't excusing the situation at the border. Like I said, I find it wholly unacceptable, which is why I'm attempting to do a donation stream to a charity to help alleviate it. Rescue.org is a highly rated charity from everything that I've seen, from Charity Watch to random Google reviews to everywhere else. Specifically, they focus on once the family or the immigrants are released from custody or transferred over, they provide services to try and help them survive, essentially. Again, I'm not trying to bring more people over. I'm trying to solve the crisis that we have. I think you and I would both agree at this point that this is a crisis. So I'm trying to do what I can to help. Now, do I think that the difference between Trump and Biden's policies was huge? Yes.
The time
absolutely.
for silence is over.
Dash Mickey with $45 donation. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. James Redacted, that's honestly a great answer. As you spoke, I wrote down some quick notes, and with your permission, could I quote you, write about your views on the issue? I didn't get it word for word, but I have a general idea of your view noted down. And if I send you the notes, could I credit you and mention your views in the article? Yeah, sure. Just go ahead and send it to me, brother. You can email it through the website, theleftspeaks.com. You can message me on Facebook. You can DM me on Twitter. You could whisper me through Twitch, but I wouldn't recommend that because those tend to get lost. But yeah, by all means, send it to me for a proof and I'll absolutely look it over, but I don't have a problem being quoted or cited somewhere. Yeah, Discord should be fine as well. Thank you. It may be till tomorrow before I can get back to you. I hope that's okay. And I've got the new button set up, so everybody bear with me. This one? Hey, we're getting somewhere. So this will be the charity that we will be donating to. As you can see, 87% of all donations go to programs, only 8% to administration and 5% to funding. So 87 cents out of every dollar you donate will be going towards the cause. They provide asylum-seeking families who have been released from immigration custody with critical aid. They work on reuniting families post-detention, provide warm meals, clothing, transitional shelters, travel coordination with relatives in the United States, and critical or crucial legal orientation. So feel free to donate. Tolstoy, you have not donated anything yet, but if you feel free to donate, you are more than welcome. Like I said, this is not going to some democratic cause. I tried to pick somewhat of a neutral charity organization that is going to go specifically to the immigrants seeking asylum. I looked at the Red Cross. The problem I had with the Red Cross, or the reason I didn't ultimately pick them, was because the donation you couldn't specify went to the situation at the border. So again, I would hope you and I would agree that the children who are unaccompanied need to get back to their parents, need to get processed as quickly as possible, right? Just beyond the political dispute, who did it better, who's doing it better, all that kind of stuff. Let's try and help the kids, okay? That's the ultimate goal here as far as I'm concerned. Yes, James Redacted. I grew up in a one-stop-light town. Whether you want to consider that rural or not is entirely up for debate. So I would say I was about an hour or so outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So it's not like I was in rural Texas where you can be hours from a major metro city. But the city that I grew up in, the town I grew up in, had one stoplight at the time. Tolstoy, you don't believe in charity, you're a socialist. You believe it's the government's job to take care of that. Feel free, my brother. You are more than welcome to try to find a way to donate to FEMA directly if that's what you would like to do. That being said, I am unaware of any socialist position that would require you to ignore charitable organizations, but maybe I'm just ignorant on the topic. So what is going on at the border right now? From the BBC, so again, an impartial source, or as impartial as I can find, right? We're looking at a 20-year high in the number of migrants arriving at the southern border, including thousands of children who are being kept in government-run detention facilities that critics say are inhumane. It's a record-breaking influx of children that has basically broken the system, from what I can tell. And it is, I completely agree, growing into a humanitarian crisis. I would argue that it already is a humanitarian crisis, which is why I'm trying to do the donation stream as best I can. Okay. President Joe Biden has urged migrants not to attempt to travel to the U.S. border. This started breaking on March the 22nd of this year. Okay. As of the 21st of March, we were looking at 15,500 unaccompanied children in custody, according to U.S. media. A third, approximately, at that point in time, have been kept over 72 hours, which is the legal limit. Okay. The officials in charge are blaming pandemic restrictions and abnormally cold weather in Texas for the delay. So they're also pointing to the fact that Texas froze over and it broke a bunch of the infrastructure down there, which at the time was somewhat understandable, but I do think that's somewhat of an excuse. This is one of the major issues I have with the Biden administration regarding this. What are the conditions like? In short, we don't know yet. Journalists haven't been permitted inside the camp since Joe Biden took office in January, although the White House says they will be. This needs to be rectified. Let the press in. Even if it's ugly, shine light on it. Let's start getting it clean. I appreciate that you want to send in FEMA. I appreciate that you want to process these kids as quickly as you can. You are saying all of the right things. I understand the truth might not be pretty right now because the situation is a lot more than you anticipated, but hiding it isn't making it better. And it's going to cost you some temporary support, but it's better than looking like you're hiding it, in my opinion. Shine a light on the whole damn thing, expose what's going on, expose the problems, show us also what you're doing to fix it, but let's get to it. This is the most popular photo from inside the camp, as you can see. This was in Donna, Texas, if I recall correctly. This is a temporary tent facility, the same facility that was set up. By the way, this was exposed by a Democratic Texas congressman whose name is eluding me at the moment, but it will come up. So I do appreciate him for exposing that and putting it out there. This wasn't exposed by the opposition party. This is Democrats pointing out where Democrats are failing, which needs to be done because, again, I do consider this a failure. XUUT, welcome to the chat. Trump needs to buy Epstein Island and inbreed more Trump tards. Nah, I think that's terrible. Argos Toliandasis, I hope I said that correctly. Ignoring cult behavior is a service to society. I have no idea what you're referring to. I must have missed something, but I appreciate you being here again. Some of the Trump era facilities have been renovated and upgraded, so they are in use again. Let the journalist in so they can see the renovations and the upgrades and the improvements and the processing to get them out of camps. If you want to say you're doing it better and still trying to do it even better than before, then don't close this shit off. Open it up and let everybody see it. It might not be pretty. I'm not going to argue with you about that. But quit trying to hide it. This is the surge that we're seeing. As I said, you could see a drastic decline in encounters along the border during the pandemic, and it's since started rising again. You can almost pinpoint exactly where it happened. The one thing I do want to point out, and we'll look at a different graph here in a minute, is that this, and you'll see it in the longer graph, migration from our southern border to the United States tends to surge right about this time of the year in most years. Basically, when it starts getting warm, or when it starts getting not cold as hell in the desert, but before it starts getting scorching hot. This is migration season, which is why I said the Biden administration, to a certain extent, should have seen this coming. U.S. has also placed thousands of radio and digital advertisements in Spanish and Portuguese across South and Central America, warning people not to come. and have called for emergency talks with officials in Mexico and Guatemala to ask for help in stemming the flow of migrants. I understand that right now in this second, but I think it's the wrong message and the wrong way to go about it, personally. The Biden administration has also said that these detention centers are no place for children and that they are exploring alternatives to allow migrants to apply for asylum from their home country instead of attempting the dangerous journey. So this is going to go back to how one applies for asylum typically in the first place, which we're about to start diving into, what asylum is, how you apply for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and why this crisis is being exacerbated. Hey, Hardwood and Sock. Thanks. Welcome back, man. I appreciate you being here. Argos, that's very smart to educate the Central American people about the risk and dangers of coming to the United States. I don't agree. It's 100% the correct way to address the root cause, though. Ignoring it and not addressing the root cause is what I'd call neglectful and avoidant. I tend to agree with you there, but I don't know which root cause you're pointing to. I think the nation states that these people are leaving have some serious issues, and that by helping those nations invest in themselves, we could help address the root cause. You may be pointing to another root cause with which I'm unfamiliar. Hardwood and Sock, missed most of the stream so far, so I'm behind. So quick recap. We're going to go over Biden's problems at the border right now, specifically related to the children. We're going to go over asylum. We're going to go over the differences between conservative and progressive messaging regarding asylum, migration, and immigration specifically. Where I find issues with both the Biden administration's response thus far and where I find serious issues with conservative messaging on migration, immigration, and asylum seekers. Furthermore, you can see the donation bar up at the top of the stream. Okay. We're donating to rescue.org, which basically once asylum seekers are processed through the United States system and released and transferred, they help with temporary shelter. They help migrants get back in contact with their families or get in contact with their families in the U.S. They provide food, clothing. And one of the problems specifically related to the children in the United States that are being processed is A, we can't process them quick enough, and I can't do anything to address that. But B, finding somebody to release them to, finding shelters for them. So every dollar that is donated will go specifically to an organization that is rated extremely well by Charity Watch and by several other sources I found via Google for addressing asylum seekers in the United States specifically. So even if we disagree politically, feel free to follow the donate link, !donate. You can donate via PayPal, and that will help the situation, help the children in the situation specifically. Okay. Again, we're talking food, shelter, clothing here. Nobody's like trying to bring more people from south of the border. So I tried to be as nonpartisan with it as I could. I looked at picking the Red Cross. I didn't ultimately pick the Red Cross because I couldn't find a way with the Red Cross to specifically try and target this situation. So if I don't want kids in cages, if you don't want kids in cages, right, we can't do anything to speed up the United States government processing, but it looks like they're sending FEMA down there. So that part is being done. The next step they need after that is a place to go. And this organization will help either find them a place to go or provide them a place to go. So that's why I picked it. You got a bunch to criticize Biden about around this. Let's go. More than welcome, brother. The number is always toll free, but it's not quite open yet. It's there. You'd be on hold, but I'm going to run through some of my evidence first, but I appreciate it. Argos Toliendosis. Yes, that's one of the root causes: jobs, crime, corrupt politicians, etc. It is progress to directly address the people in the It is progress to directly address the people that the USA is their savior here. There are many other countries out there. Why is the USA beholden to these nations over others? That's confusing to me. United States citizens can sponsor families that want to seek asylum in the United States. So there is a process for that. So if people don't feel that the government is doing enough, they themselves can take a role part. So to go into specifically why the United States has an obligation in this. Okay. And that's actually a perfect segue into some of the videos that I've got for you guys. Back in, I believe it was 1951, the United Nations basically passed a resolution that a whole bunch of countries signed up on post-World War II era. Okay. Because when the Jewish people were being prosecuted and persecuted in Nazi Germany, they had no rights when they fled. The United States personally turned back a ship of Jewish refugees, and a third of them ended up dying when they returned to Europe. So everybody, every country around the world looked at this situation and said, holy shit, we need to do something so that if this were to ever happen again, people fleeing that situation,
The time for silence is over.
Kilikov, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. The people fleeing that situation wouldn't be stuck in the same situation that the people fleeing, or that the Jewish people fleeing Nazi Germany were stuck in. As to why we have an obligation to Central and South America, I don't think that our obligation is to them specifically, but that's just geography, right? We didn't have nearly as many refugees from the crisis in Syria as Europe did, because it requires a hell of a lot more resources to hop on a plane or buy a plane ticket than it does to just start walking, right? It would make sense to me that Central and South America, again, same problem. It's going to cost a hell of a lot more money and resources to buy a plane ticket over to Germany, for instance, than it would to just start walking. And that appears to be what a lot of these folks have done. To dive into refugee rights.
The convention states that people have these basic rights no matter where they are in the world. The right to an education, to exercise religion, to justice, to remain in a country, to not be punished for illegal entry into the territory, to practice a profession, to housing and to own property, to form and join trade unions, to public relief and assistance, to freedom of movement within the territory, to be issued identity and travel documents. All refugees are required to abide by the laws of their host country and respect the maintenance of public order. Today, the convention is more important than ever. The planet is facing its worst refugee crisis since World War II. Almost 1% of the Earth's population is an asylum seeker, internally displaced, or a refugee, according to a 2015 UNHCR report. That's about 24 people displaced every minute. There will always be war, famine, drought, hunger, crises. There will always be refugees. But respect and care for refugees is a universal human value.
From Kilikov, Turkey hosts 4 million Syrian refugees, sir. What do you think about that? And Mr. Erdogan thinks threats European countries by releasing refugees. Sorry for the grammar mistakes if you made any. No worries about grammar, brother. I'm not going to nitpick you as long as I can understand you. And if I don't understand you, I will ask for clarification. I promise that's better than I would do in a foreign language. Refugees, by international treaty, have rights. Just as basic people, right? As you saw there, it's part of tons of different religions around the world to take care of people that are in dire circumstances, whether it's drought, whether it's famine, whether it's war, etc. As for Turkey specifically, I would admire them for taking in 4 million. They are extremely close to Syria, obviously, so it makes sense that Syrians would head that direction. Again, it's cheaper to walk. That's just reality. I think the threat to release 4 million, Erdogan is pretty far right. I think he's playing to the conservative fears in Europe. That would be my basic assumption. That being said, I do not focus on European immigration because I don't live in Europe. And European societies, every society is different. The United States is very different than every other country. I focus on the United States of America. So I can give you my opinion, but I will be the first to admit that I'm not I'm not going to be as informed on it as I would be if I lived in Turkey or lived in Germany or lived in France or Britain, for example. So I hope that answers your question in just a general sense, but in terms of specifics, like if you're going to ask me why they accepted 4 million but didn't accept 4.1 million, I'm not going to be able to answer that. To focus more on refugee rights here, this is going to be from Australia, if I remember correctly.
The convention.
So again, since we're looking at international law, I wanted to get an opinion that was somewhat separated from the United States of America, specifically for asylum and refugee seekers.
So that instrument defined refugees as people who are outside their country with a well-founded fear of persecution for one of 5 reasons, namely nationality, political opinion, religion, membership of a particular social group, or their race. Originally, that treaty said that you were only a refugee if you were fleeing events that had occurred prior to the 1st of January 1951. However, in 1967, countries adopted a protocol to the 1951 Refugee Convention, which essentially removed that limitation. By ratifying the Refugee Convention, Australia promises to abide by the obligations set out there. Perhaps the most important one is the principle of non-refoulement or non-return, which is contained in Article 33. This means that Australia has promised not to send refugees back to places where they fear persecution for reasons of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or their membership of a particular social group.
So again, that's the understanding of international law that Australia signed, that we also signed, though we signed in 1968, I believe, not in 1951, because we were late to the party as Americans, that you don't just get to ship them back home, right? You have to investigate their claim, see if there's really a danger, see if it's valid. You can't just, hey, I know you showed up at the border and you think you're going to die, but go away, right? That doesn't work. And we agreed to it. This is a treaty that we ratified in 68, I believe it was, but I'll pull it up in just a second. To go into specifics of why, new buttons again, everybody, I apologize. In 1939, a ship carrying 937 Jewish refugees was turned away in Cuba. Okay? They appealed to the United States and Canada for entry, and they were denied. They were forced to sail back to Europe. Okay? The majority who traveled survived the Holocaust, but 254 later died as the Nazis swept through the continent. So these were people who tried to get out of the mess that they saw themselves in. And this isn't the single example, it's just the most obvious example, right? And I think everybody in hindsight and retrospect would not blame any adult if I couldn't afford, or if there was some reason why I couldn't go with my children, with my son, but the Nazis were taking over, I'd put him on a boat by himself and hope somebody would take care of him on the way, because it seems like it would be a better chance. Okay? So that's why we define these rights. Argos, do we ever fear that asylum rights are being abused by anyone? Potentially. I could see that argument, which is why they have to be processed, right? I'm fine with investigating the claims or the need for asylum. The problem I have is you don't get to send them back to Nazi Germany and say, hey, we'll figure it out. One of the rights of asylum is you get to run first, right, to the country you're seeking asylum in and say, please help me. And it's investigated while you're there and while you're safe. Okay? We've all seen the movies where the spy runs across the embassy border, right, and says, you know, I'm seeking asylum. And they don't just kick them right back out and hand them over to the, you know, Cold War Russians while we figure out whether they're asylum seekers or not. Okay? You take them in first, you sort it out afterwards, which has traditionally been the process in this country. Hardwood and sock. Personally, I do. I think everybody should be vetted thoroughly before being allowed entry. It could definitely be used by bad actors trying to enter the country. The problem is you're sending a lot of good actors, I would argue a majority of good actors, back into the arms of people that are actively seeking to hurt them or into situations that are terrible, right? If somebody is leaving because of a famine, because there is no food where they are, and you say, hey, we agree internationally, we don't want this situation to happen again like what happened to the Jews in Germany, right? But your ass needs to go back down there and starve until we have time to process it, right? You've solved the problem, I guess, by letting them die where they are. You're defeating the whole purpose of trying to be a refugee, of trying to seek asylum, right? So that's the problem with it. Once they get here, if you want to investigate, see if they're legit, see if they have valid reasons and causes and concerns, or if they're just trying to get into America for free, or however you want to word it, right? I don't have an issue with you investigating afterwards. But I am going to have an issue with you sending the ship of Jewish refugees back to Nazi Germany while you try and figure out whether their claim is valid or not. A few weeks ago, you scanned over some of the asylum-seeking metrics, and you'd be surprised how many qualify and how many are disqualified. It was quite clear that there were abuses of the rights. Just wondering anybody's thoughts. I haven't seen those metrics specifically, but we are going to go into what used to be considered qualification, what isn't qualification, and how it goes forward going here. That's actually the next videos coming up. Hardwood and sock, of course you agree. That's why we have these processing centers while we do vet them. Then I must have misunderstood you. I thought you were saying you did not want them in the country. Okay. I'm fine with processing centers to a certain extent. Again, it depends on the timeline, how it's being enforced, all that kind of stuff. I am trying so hard to get these buttons down, guys. I apologize.
First, let's define what asylum is and how it differs from refugee or immigrant status. An asylum seeker is someone who fears harm or persecution in their home country and is seeking legal protection in a new one. There are two types of asylum: affirmative and defensive. In affirmative asylum cases, people can proactively request asylum when they arrive to the US or within a year of doing so. In defensive asylum cases, people who are facing deportation can request asylum to avoid removal proceedings. A refugee, on the other hand, is defined by the International Rescue Committee as someone who's been forced from their home because of war, violence, or persecution. An immigrant, meanwhile, is someone who makes the conscious decision to leave his or her own home to settle in a new place. There can be overlap between the immigrant, refugee, and asylum categories, but to apply for asylum, which is a legal process in the US, there's a specific set of rules you have to follow. First, you have to be physically present in the US or at a port of entry, like an airport or a border checkpoint, to apply. And you have to be willing and able to prove that you have a fear of persecution, and then lay out the reasons for that fear, along with a lot of other personal information in this 12-page application.
Let's say you're a dissident in China and you're working for freedom, democracy, maybe you're an artist who's expressing themselves against the government, and they punish you somehow in a way that a country with more freedom wouldn't. That's a pretty classic asylum case. That's kind of what we'd expect. That's kind of the post-Cold War framework of political asylum, but there's also, of course, asylum based on race, religion, nationality, and then what we call membership in a particular social group, which is where it gets a little more complicated.
It's complicated because what qualifies as a social group isn't totally straightforward. Generally, it applies to traits that people cannot or should not be required to change, such as gender or sexual orientation. So yes, being persecuted for being a woman or a member of the LGBTQ+ community would apply here. But sometimes the lines are more blurred, like whether families or victims of domestic violence count as social groups. Historically, both of them have counted, but former U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions worked to roll back protections for both those groups.
So the Trump administration changed what counted as a social group compared to what historically we had counted as a social group. That's one big thing to consider. Bring chat back in. And Argos, I appreciate you not judging me, because I am murdering these buttons, my man. Like I said, I just switched them. It'll make it easier in the long run, but I was used to where it was on the keyboard as hotkey, so I appreciate the not judging. From Hardwood and Sock, yeah, in my opinion, if they are in processing centers, they aren't quite in the country yet because they are being detained. If we release them before being fully vetted is where you have an issue. So what the policy used to be, from my understanding, is essentially somebody that's coming here seeking asylum wants to go through the process, right? They want to be here legally, okay? There's no reason they wouldn't be, right? If I run from Nazi Germany or from MS-13 in Honduras, to use the conservative talking point, because it is so bad, right? Why would I not want to establish a new home in my new country? And furthermore, why would I want to risk being here in my new country illegally, where if I do get caught breaking the law, I'm 100% going to get sent back to the shit that I just ran from, right? So it would be in my benefit to try and follow the steps that that nation needs me to follow to be there legally. It would protect me. It would protect my family. It would protect my, son, whatever the case is, right? I'm going to be motivated to follow those steps. So the Obama administration's answer was simply to basically, we're going to process you, make sure really quickly that, you're not some international known terrorist type of situation. And then we're going to schedule you for court dates, and we're going to schedule you for processing. Okay. But we're not going to maintain you in the detention facilities during that time because you're not a threat to the United States. Most of these people would show up to their court proceedings because, again, it benefits them to do so. I'm not expecting a lot of threats out of kids either, right? Which is the main thing, again, that the donations are for. Right? That's what we're trying to solve here, is that crisis specifically. But the point overall is that to seek asylum, you have to go to that country, or you have to be at one of their ports of entry. That's the way legally it works. So when they come here, walk across the border and say, hey, I'm seeking asylum, per international law, per the treaty that the United States agreed to in 1968, they are doing what the hell they're supposed to do. That doesn't make them illegal. They're literally doing what they're supposed to do. And the reasons it was set up that way are historically, to me, pretty clear. All is good, my online friend from Argus. Thank you, sir. I greatly appreciate it. Now, like I said, the other thing to realize, March 2019, May 2019, even during down years of immigration, we see the spike March, May, June. March, May, June. March, surprise, surprise. March, surprise, surprise. This is 20 years of apprehensions at the border. April, March, 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 April, March. I think you get the point. I don't think I need to scream March 100 more times. Okay? This is consistently an issue around this time of year, right? The difference this time specifically, we're in the middle of a global pandemic still, right? We're vaccinating people as fast as humanly possible, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay. So there's a lot of regulations and controls into place to try and restrict the movement of people at a time when people historically move across the southern United States border, or at least they have for the last 20 years. I'm sure you can go back further than that and find stats that this is the time of year when it happens even throughout the course of American history. So that's problem number one, is we've got a lot of extra protections and cautions in place that are slowing down the movement of people. Number two, like I said, is specifically a lot of unaccompanied minors, a lot of unaccompanied children right now specifically. So hey, we got it right on the first try this time.
The Attorney General actually has incredible executive authority to rewrite the law in immigration in ways that they just don't in other fields. And that has been devastating for Central American asylum, because so many of my cases are people who are being targeted as a family, as a unit.
Powerful incentives were created for aliens to come here illegally and claim a fear of return. In effect, word spread that by asserting fear, they could remain in the United States one way or another. Far too often, that rumor proved to be true.
In 2018, Sessions issued an opinion overruling a previous decision by the Board of Immigration Appeals that allowed asylum for survivors of domestic violence. Sessions' opinion narrowed the types of violence that applied to the social group category, essentially stating that violence committed by, quote, non-governmental actors no longer qualified.
He went out of his way to say that if it's just private violence, if it's just violence between two people, then that's not our problem.
However, you could be at serious threat of persecution or violence based on any of these established categories and still not qualify for asylum in the U.S. And that's because your case depends more on who's actually persecuting you than the real risks you face.
Who and why? That's really what it comes down to. It's possible that you may not get asylum because the person who's going to do those things to you isn't the right kind of person for an asylum case. And I know how arbitrary and strange that seems, to have your safety depend on who is persecuting you and why, but that's the law. I tweeted about a case in which I'd learned that my client had been killed in his home country, very much along the lines of what we'd been told he might be. And this was an asylum case, so he was before the judge, telling the judge that he was afraid to go back and that he was going to be killed if he went back. You know, I have to say, I think that this has probably happened before, but I didn't know.
So we changed, the United States changed how we implemented our asylum policies, and basically said that if it wasn't a government organization, we didn't give a shit. So if it was the SA, members of the Nazi party before they, seized control of the government over in Germany or were elected to the government, tough shit, you're on your own. If it's MS-13, in Honduras, to use a current conservative talking point that they, scream about, oh, MS-13 is going to come up here and take over this city and that city and all this kind of stuff, right? We don't care. We can even acknowledge in court, like the judge did, we believe you might die if you go back. We believe you, and we believe you believe that, but tough shit. We're going to send you back anyway. At a basic human level, I have a problem with that. And maybe we disagree on that. But when it's a verifiable threat, the courts and the judges agree with the person, I don't know why somebody who marched thousands of miles, hundreds of miles, minimum, to get to the United States, somebody who wants to be an American citizen and join this country because of the values we represent. And for a lot of you, put a lot more effort into joining the United States than you or I ever did, right? Because we were just born here. We just happened to win that, roll of the dice lottery. This person made the conscious decision to walk hundreds of miles to get here. Obviously motivated by the shining city on a hill, to use Reagan's term, that America is, was, and should be to the entire world, to turn that person around after we acknowledge the threat and say tough shit. Like I said, I can't agree with that as a policy, just at all. Hardwood and sock, most unaccompanied minors in 15 years, I believe. I'm not sure about the 15 years. I know specifically going back to at least 2013. You are correct. So that's what? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you're right on the money, brother. But it's a huge influx of unaccompanied minors, which is the problem right now. ROI 226. Hey, welcome to the chat and the show, brother. I appreciate you dropping in. Hey, can I ask what's your opinion on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? You can ask. Yeah, you can ask me anything, man. I was going to make a joke, but of course you can ask me. The short version on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to me is I think both sides ultimately want and deserve and need to live in peace. I think personally, again, I do not live in Israel or Palestine, right? I think personally that there needs to be some sort of two-state solution between the two countries. I don't know exactly what that would look like. Minds a lot greater than mine have worked on this problem continuously. I don't think the answer is building walls and, seizing land from minorities and over-policing Palestinians. And I don't think that's the answer long term. I think it's making the problem worse, not better. Do I think the resolution is like the dissolvement of the Jewish state? No, not remotely. Okay. Do I think the resolvement is the, ejection of the Palestinian people? No, not remotely. I'm not going to be in favor of an apartheid state like we had in South Africa, right? Between, blacks and whites in South Africa. I'm not going to be in favor of that in Israel either. That's the simple version. Dash Mickey needs more coffee. That sounds wonderful. Hardwood and socks. So I guess it's where's the limit? I agree with you that people being threatened by MS-13 should qualify for asylum, but should somebody who is being threatened by a singular individual qualify? So working on your premise and understanding that we're a nation founded on immigration in the first place, correct? I don't know why I would decline that person if I acknowledge straight off that the threat is real, right? Because I'm assuming that the threat is real and valid, like in this court case. So yes, me personally, I would be fine with that. Could they potentially have had other options and other places to go? Sure, absolutely. And we should feel honored that they wanted to come here, that they wanted to become an American, that they wanted to participate in our country, make our country grow, make our country stronger, right? And I don't understand where that disconnect is. You and I are proud, and I'm speaking to Hardwood and Sox specifically here because we've had a discussion before. So I know, or at least I know you live in America currently, and I assume that you were born here, right? We're proud to be American just because we were born here. Can you imagine walking hundreds to thousands of miles to get here? And how proud you would be to have that opportunity at a new, safer life? I just don't see a reason for, because again, using your hypothetical here, we've already acknowledged this person isn't a threat, right? So this person isn't a threat. This is a person that is being threatened. I don't know why we wouldn't take them as a nation founded on immigration in the first place. Dash Mickey, welcome back with the coffee. Greatly appreciate that. Argos, it's very frustrating to me that the Israel-Palestinian issue spills onto the world stage. I have a hard time respecting people that don't respect themselves. Not sure quite directly where you're going with that. The Israel-Palestinian situation spills onto the world stage because it was kind of created by the world stage to a large extent. When, Great Britain pulled out of all their colonies, right, they basically deeded Palestinian land to the pro-Zionist movement, return to Israel movement after World War II. Most of the Jewish people who returned to Israel at that point were from around the world, right? So, I mean, it very much is an international discussion, though I agree that it needs to be solved ultimately between Palestinians and Israelis. I am fine with exerting outside pressure on that because that's ultimately how apartheid got stripped down in South Africa as well. Do I think that those rules should be imposed? No, I think you need to get those two parties to the table to reach some kind of reasonable compromise. And that's not what I see going on right now. ROI 226, the wall was built after 1,000 Jews killed in 2000-2001, but I agree both sides suffer. 1,300 rockets sent to Israel last year, and Palestinians have limited resources and access to movement. I think first it should start in education and humanizing the other side and then finding a solution, because the two-state solution, while both populations don't want each other, it'll be a disaster. I tend to agree with you. I think a big part of it is humanizing other people. There has been violence from both sides. I mean, that's just the reality of it. It's retaliatory back and forth. I see why there's violence from both sides, right? If you've got a suspected terrorist organization firing rockets into Israel, it makes sense to me. Israel wants to go in and knock out the suspected terrorist that's, Hamas or whatever, that has all the rockets and that sort of stuff. At the same token, when you do that, right, when you use that force to go in to take out the terrorist, as the United States is seeing with drone strikes and everything else, if you accidentally kill one person that's a civilian, or even if you kill a terrorist, that's somebody's friend, relative, son, mother, brother, whatever the case is, right? You're multiplying the hatred from that side. So you're encouraging the behavior. There's not an easy solution. I agree with you. The answer is education, getting both sides to the table to sit down and talk, putting outside pressure on both sides to find some kind of peaceful resolution to this. That would be my 2 cents. From Argos, prior to Great Britain making the current situation and lines of land ownership, Israel and Palestine have had a millennial-long fight of land rights. It's an ongoing, never-ending hate of one culture to another, and the world suffers their self-righteous argument that anyone owns land. Again, I have low tolerance for people that kill so indiscriminately with rockets and continued tribal wars. It is a long-term conflict. I will agree with you on that. Hardwood and sock on the Israeli front. I think that peace deals recognizing Israel as a nation will go a long way to obtaining peace in that region. I don't agree. I don't think they heard anything, but these were, I'm assuming you're referring to the Trump peace deals, right? Those were all nations that hadn't been actively in any kind of conflict with Israel in forever. So those, like I said, they didn't hurt anything, but I don't think they really helped anything either. It'd be like you and me saying, hey, we're going to declare peace with each other. And we've never seen each other. We've never like swung fist at each other. I mean, me and you personally, right? All we've had is a phone call, right? But I'll sign a peace treaty if you want to. I don't think it really makes a damn bit of difference. I don't think anybody watching the stream is going to give a damn, right? But I'll do it. And if you want to wave it around and pretend like we accomplished something great, sure, I guess. Like I said, it didn't hurt anything. It's not a detriment, but it's, to me, vastly overblown from what it was, or for what it actually was. Back to immigration in the United States. To go to Hardwood and Sock's point earlier, this graph here, the highest point prior to right now was 11,475 unaccompanied minors. As of March 2021, we are at 18,663. So yes, this is the highest point. ROI, thank you for your time, sir. Chris is fine, but you are more than welcome, man. I appreciate it.
The time for silence is over.
The Trump administration has been making it harder and harder for people to qualify for asylum, but it's also made it harder to even apply in the first place. In July 2019, the DOJ issued a rule stating that migrants who pass through specific countries such as Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala would be denied asylum in the US if they don't apply in those countries first. This rule applies to almost all migrants who reach the US-Mexico border, mostly from Central America, but also from Africa. The policy's critics argue this system would effectively put an end to America's asylum process as we know it. The administration has also begun implementing plans to return asylum seekers to Mexico while they wait for their claims to be processed in the US, sending tens of thousands of people to cities known for high rates of violence, kidnapping, and murder.
Ya cuando a mí me dicen que me regresan a Juárez, yo siento que fue algo que como que fue un balde de agua fría que me tiraron. Y sentí que todo se me derrumbó otra vez. Y yo dije, Dios mío, ¿qué voy a hacer yo en Juárez? No conozco a nadie. Para mí México para mí mis hijos andando sola, no es un lugar, como le puedo decir, que yo confiable para salir con mis 3 hijos sola. Entonces es algo que yo decía, yo cómo voy a enfrentar todo esto.
And on top of all this, there's another catch. If you apply for asylum through all the right channels, but your request is denied, USCIS can use the 12 pages of information you just submitted to deport you. The question for us is, what responsibility does the US have to the people who are seeking asylum here?
So I think, and thank you ROI again for the follow. I think that's one of the central points, right? What responsibility, what level of compassion, what level of humanity do we want to show to people who are trying to seek asylum? And to somebody that's that motivated, do we want to turn them away in the first place? Assuming, again, that they pass background check and that they're on the up and up, right? To go back to Hardwood and Sock's hypothetical, right? If I have somebody that's in Brazil or in Panama, right, and is in a life-threatening situation, we accept, for sake of hypothetical, that somebody's going to kill them there, right? Whether it's, MS-13, whether it's a, domestic violence situation, the specifics of it don't really matter, right? But they need to get out of where in the hell they're at because they have a valid concern for their life. I don't see a reason on its face to deny that person asylum in the United States, a nation built on immigrants, all of whom came over here, with the exception of African Americans, but came over here in search of a better life, leaving a situation that wasn't, that they thought they could do better in, right? The huge influx of Irish Americans, of Irish into this country who ultimately became Irish Americans, right, was all centered around a famine. That's why they came in the first place, in such large numbers, in such a large wave, right? Famine, trying to look for a way to better their life for them and their families. And they picked the United States. And they have become a very valuable, huge demographic group in the United States. And nobody looks at Irish Americans anymore as anything other than Americans and a reason to have a beer on St. Patrick's Day. And I don't see at a base level why this situation or why that individual situation is any different. Can you get me on board with, hey, we just want to make sure some of these people aren't terrorists? Sure, absolutely, I guess. There are easier ways to get in the country if you want to commit terrorism than hiking across thousands of miles or hundreds of miles of desert. But if you want to check and make sure, fine, have at it. Okay? But beyond that, the arguments that are made against immigration, which we're about to jump into here in a second, are mostly, from what I see, fear-mongering and based on some really scary shit. I swear I'm about 50-50 on getting this thing right. So this was Tucker Carlson recently on Fox News.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence. So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? The power that I have as an American guaranteed at birth is one man, one vote, and they're diluting it. No, they're not allowed to do that. Why are we putting up with this?
Hardwood and Sock, I agree with you. I'll bring Chad back in a second. Nobody is importing voters. Tucker Carlson. Immigrants don't get to vote. Citizens, American citizens, get to vote. Replacement, which you said about 1 million times, is a problem as a term because it ties back directly to white nationalist and white supremacist rhetoric in the United States, as we will demonstrate after this. And this isn't the first time you've done this nonsense. You have citizenship because you were born in the United States. You, Tucker Carlson, have citizenship. That citizenship is what grants you the right to vote in the United States. Not just because you happened to be born here. If somebody moves here and they go through the steps to become a United States citizen, then they will also enjoy the right to vote. You're one person, one vote. You still have one vote. Furthermore, since nobody is importing these people, there is no reason that they would vote for Democrats over Republicans, except for your policies. Plenty of black and brown people can hold conservative views. And maybe if you quit worrying about them replacing you and the people that are already here, you could market to them a little bit easier. From Hardwood and Sock, false. Tucker, just look at the Cuban immigrants in Florida that gave the state to Trump. Absolutely, completely correct. Not even just Cuban immigrants, mind you. Cuban refugees. In a lot of cases. Who have become valuable members of the United States of America. Even if I don't agree with their tendency to lean Republican and conservative, obviously. But contribute to the economy in Florida and contribute to the United States overall. And in a great many number of cases came over here as refugees. From Argos, once a person has immigrated to the United States via asylum seeking, what is their path to the pursuit of happiness and contribution to the USA societies and cultures? What workforces do they join? How are the impoverished and lower educated immigrants in 2021 able to find employment and contribute in the United States societies that the poor in America today are unable to find? Do we feel that there's a difference between the improved USA citizens now and new immigrants? I'm not sure what you mean by improved USA citizens now. And my chat needs to catch up so this can show to everybody, because that was a long set of text. The short version is, from everything that I've seen, when you have immigrant, unskilled labor show up in a local area, it will slightly, extremely slightly depress wages for like people without high school degrees, unskilled labor, for a short period of time. Overall, it provides a boost to that local economy, to that state economy, and to the national economy. Immigration is a net positive, and that's the consensus, the vast, overwhelming consensus of economists around the globe. So the argument that it's going to, destroy the economy is just flat, simply not true. Okay. Does it affect, like I said, the most unskilled of labor slightly? From what I've seen, the answer to that is yes, for a short period of time. Yet another reason to be in favor of a strong safety net, which I advocate for continuously on this show. As to, okay, clarified your question. Do we feel there's a difference between the impoverished USA citizens now and new immigrants? It depends on what you mean by difference. Do I think they're both equally capable of contributing to American society? Absolutely. Do I think they should have the same access to universal health care, to education opportunities, and those sorts of things? Sure, absolutely. Because, again, ultimately, that's going to benefit our country, right? Do I think that new immigrants here would need additional funds for classes such as, English as a second language and stuff like that? Sure, absolutely. But again, I'm not opposed to that. This country was built on immigration, and I'd say it's worked out for us pretty damn well in the long run, considering we've got, the largest economy in the world now. So I don't know why we would want to start shutting ourselves off from people who also want to come here now. And again, I'm working from the basis of we can vet people and make sure you're not a terrorist. I'm cool with that. I will concede that straight off as long as we're talking about a reasonable time frame here. I'm thinking in terms of their ability to be successful in the USA. If our own poor are struggling, then how can an immigrant not also suffer the same struggles? So if somebody immigrates here, I'm going to, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding your question, okay? But if somebody were to immigrate here, your question is, how do we help them, or wouldn't they experience the same difficulties that our own impoverished Americans experience? Potentially, yes. My answer would be to provide, like I said, strong safety nets to make sure that nobody slips through the cracks, to help both the immigrant to this country and the impoverished American to this country, whether that's rural, urban, whatever the case is, lift themselves out of that bottom rung of society in America, right? I would be in favor of giving them both equal opportunity to do that. I think that is more than affordable, more than fundable, and I think in the long run, it greatly pays for itself. One of the most massive productive economies we've ever seen in this country was when we brought all the soldiers back from World War II and we said, hey, every guy that went over there, yeah, GI Bill's a thing, you can all go to college now, right? So I'm hugely in favor of investing in education and strong safety nets. Do I think that every immigrant that comes over here is going to pop right into middle American society? No, I think that's unrealistic. Just like it's unrealistic to assume every American citizen in the entire country is going to make it to middle class or upper middle class or super wealthy, right? That's the goal. That's the dream. I believe in giving everybody an opportunity to reach that, right? I believe in giving everybody the, a strong safety net to survive. I'm not in favor of leaving everybody behind, but I recognize that everybody is not going to reach the same outcome levels for a variety of different reasons. For the immigrant specifically, that situation can still be a whole hell of a lot better than where they came from, right? And if they're contributing to my country my economy, in many cases serving in the United States Army, United States Marine Corps, I don't know why I would say, sorry, we don't want your contribution. We don't want your children's contributions. We acknowledge the danger you're in, but you're from the wrong part of the country for us to value you as a potential American. That doesn't make sense to me. From from Argos, great discussion. Thank you. I think that was before I just did my last little bit, so hopefully I didn't change your opinion. Hardwood and Sock, many immigrants are willing to do jobs that are less than desirable. Americans in general hate doing certain jobs because they think those jobs are beneath them. Americans in general are lazy. I don't know that I agree that Americans in general are lazy. I do agree that immigrants will come over here and do a lot of the labor that Americans tend not to do currently, American citizens currently. Argos to Hardwood and Sock, that's a false equivalency and a bit of an overgeneralization. I would tend to agree. Dash Mickey, who specifically is at the border? Children, families. It's a lot of children. It's a lot of children. And again, everybody, feel free to follow the donation link, !donate. Okay. You can donate via PayPal. I'm going to match every dollar that's donated at a minimum of $250. Okay. So I will max it out at $250 if that's what it comes to. But again, the money goes to rescue.org, which will help provide these children contact with getting back in any family, or getting in contact with any family members they have in the United States currently. Okay. Temporary shelter, temporary food, clothing, all the stuff they need once they're processed to actually get out of these holding facilities that they're in. So instead of sitting here bitching about Biden keeping kids in cages, let's try to do something together. Then why is it even a question of letting them through? From Dash Mickey. So kids refers to anybody that's under the age of 18, right? We're talking about minors. So there is some amount of concern over 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, right? Or 17-year-olds, stop at the 18. Okay. And what they might be a part of, right? They're coming from Central, South America, Mexico, right? And a 16-year-old boy, there's concern over what he may have done, not done, whatever the case is, right? From the conservative side, to be as generous as I can. Also, of course, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, right? So we're restricting the movements of people to a certain degree already because we don't want the virus moving with them. Okay. Even further than that, right? Okay, let's take away the 15, 16-year-old kid. If you've got a 5-year-old, right? You can't just say, oh, okay, well, you know, Dallas is somewhere over there, so just go that way. You know, you got to do something more with it. So again, anybody who donates, right, this money goes to provide temporary housing and get these children back in contact with any family members they may have in the United States, which would get them out of these facilities. Because you can't just take a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old and say, well, yep, you're not a terrorist. Good luck. See you out there. Hope you find some water and food and shit somewhere, because that's not acceptable either. From Hardwood and Sock, I mean lazy as in the fact that Americans generally look down on manual labor. For instance, landscaping. Americans tend to not want the job, so we tend to rely on immigrants to do it for us. Americans are not lazy in white-collar jobs. I guess I should have specified better. Immigrants, and especially illegal immigrants, tend to take the jobs that are available. I don't know that I would specify that they're hardworking or lazy, or Americans are hardworking or lazy. I think that's where Argos is disagreeing with you. There do tend to be jobs that are, whether they're, you know, more physically demanding, or whether they are less desirable because of monetary considerations, or less desirable just because they're, for whatever reason. Those are typically going to be the jobs that the people with choices will choose other things. So they'll be the most available jobs. And if you came over here as an immigrant, a lot of times, especially as a refugee or asylum seeker, right, you're not going to have first pick at existing jobs. You may not be coming over here knowing the language. You may not be coming over here knowing the, customs and skills that you would need and all those sorts of things. So you may just be relegated, unfortunately, to jobs that are less desirable to the general population for whatever reason. I don't think it goes into laziness or hard work so much. Smite Night, no, we're doing immigration. The damn chat thing wouldn't update for whatever reason. We're also doing donations. You can do an ! donate. It's going to go to rescue.org. So when the kids get out of this situation they're in with these processing facilities and Biden and everything else, this goes to help get them get temporary food, temporary shelter, back in contact with any potential family members they may have in the United States, and provide them with lawyers and all those sorts of things that they would need. Two of the big problems with immigration right now, specifically, we have a huge number of unaccompanied kids coming across the border, right? Greater than we've seen in the last 15, 20 years in terms of numbers, right? The problem's twofold once you accept that as reality. The first is processing, getting them through the governmental system, right? Supposed to take 72 hours, but since there's so many right now, the system's basically broken. President Biden has already brought in FEMA, already started setting up temporary processing facilities and those sorts of things. There's nothing you or I can do to help speed up the processing. However, once the processing is done, the kids then need a place to go, right? And that's what the donation link down below in chat will do, or you can do ! donate. This organization is rated like 87% effective or good by CharityWatch.org and multiple different sources I looked at via Google. So over 80% of every dollar you spend will go directly towards helping the immigrants or migrants across the border try and, like I said, receive temporary clothing, temporary shelter, housing, because that's one of the big problems we're having right now is once the kids are processed, we don't have a place to get them to where they're safe. And this organization seems to do that. Back to Tucker Carlson.
It's because of highly competent framing by the Democrats. They have framed immigration as a racial issue. So any complaint about immigration is a complaint born of racism. You're a racist if you're against it. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't really have that much to do with race, actually. I mean, this is people from a bunch of different countries and cultures. Most of them are Latin, but within Latin America, anyone who's ever been there can tell you, there's a huge range of people and of subcultures. Like, it's not as simple as they pretend it is. But it really is much deeper than race. Race is a factor for some people, but underneath it all, it has to do with what kind of country you want to live in and how much political power you have. By the way, I will never understand as long as I live why the so-called black leaders, Maxine Waters, people who claim to speak for black people, are sitting by and allowing black political power to disappear. Like, so in a generation, I really don't think that whoever replaces Maxine Waters in Compton is going to be listened to by anybody, because as a numerical matter, it just won't matter. Okay, so African Americans who by and large have been here for 400 years, their ancestors were taken here 400 years ago, they will have no say in how the country runs, because as a mathematical question, it just won't matter. No one wants to say this out loud, but it's true, and it has nothing to do with race. It has to do with the people who live here are being disempowered by a new group brought in without their consent by a political party that cares only about political power. If you frame it that way, I think everyone can kind of wake up and realize what's happening.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The black Americans will be the first victims of this, and they will be rendered demographically irrelevant, and they'll wonder, and they'll suddenly figure out, oh, all this Georgia Jim Crow talk is it was actually just a cover for something entirely different.
Exactly. That's what it is.
So it's not about race. But we're going to talk about black Americans, a racial group, losing political power because we're bringing a different racial group in here. Exactly, according to Tucker Carlson. This is why great replacement theory is racist as shit, right? The demographics are changing. Who cares? As long as you value America, value freedom, value our system of government, I don't care whether you're white, brown, purple, black, green, orange, whatever. If you were next to me in a foxhole, I could give less than a shit about that as long as you've got my back. And I feel the same way if you're here in this country and you want to become a tax-paying citizen. I think that's a good aspiration that we should encourage. And those black Americans that Tucker Carlson wasn't worried about, even though immigration isn't a racial issue, they can keep voting. Nobody is taking away their vote. And they're just like now, those people are going to vote just like every other American for policies that they think benefits America. Like Black Lives Matter. Trying to restrict police brutality against Americans, especially when targeted against minorities disproportionately. And as Hardwood and Sock pointed out, there is no reason that any individual minority group should vote for Democrats or Republicans just because of their race. So Tucker Carlson, quit trying to make it about race. As Hardwood and Sock said, Tucker is the one making it about race. Exactly, to quote Tucker Carlson. You know, when the host started talking about demographic changes and everything. Oh, yeah, that's it. Dejanic 4, I think I've seen you in here before. If so, welcome back. If not, welcome to the stream. I greatly appreciate you showing up. So now we're going to talk about why. So first off, we're going to point out this isn't a new thing for Fox News. We're going to go into what great replacement theory is and why it's a problem.
White supremacists have a specific purpose, though. They believe in policies that will lead them to the ultimate goal, a whites-only society. That's because they believe that white people are inherently superior to other races and therefore shouldn't coexist with them. However, that goal is threatened by what they call the Great Replacement. The Great Replacement is a white supremacist theory that says white populations around the world are being maliciously marginalized and replaced by people of color. In reality, we just want you to season your food a bit, but... The Great Replacement is the framework through which Fox News opinion programs parrot white supremacy.
It's an ideology that is deployed with a lot of fear.
Christina Lopez is the Deputy Director of Extremism at Media Matters.
There's a lot of fear and victimization behind it. You know, they convince audiences that every non-white population is a risk. But you see it a lot in Fox News and primetime, specifically with anti-immigrant segments.
The America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like.
Latin American countries are changing election outcomes here by forcing demographic change on this country at a rate that American voters consistently say they don't want.
Put out welcome wagons, pile them high, because we're just going to consign tens of thousands, perhaps millions of Americans to their deaths.
Why does it have to be about race, Fox News? You don't have to turn it into that. Dejanic, I saw your study. Dash Mickey, I appreciate you clarifying on the link, but that's a harvardstudy.edu, so it should be safe. I'm somewhat familiar with that study, but I'd have to look into the specifics. Even if I assumed and granted your premise that policing at a general level was not racially biased, the implementation of force most certainly has been. There are multiple studies showing that black people are more likely to be killed by a police officer than a white man, black man specifically more likely than a white man. And then when they are killed, they are like 50% more likely to be unarmed at the time of their death. So like I said, there are multiple issues on this that are going around. But I will look at your study, and I'll be more than happy to address it more in depth next stream. I glanced at it real quick while the other was playing. It's like 17 pages long, so obviously I can't go through that right now live.
This great replacement rhetoric is effective at fueling anxieties that Americans already have. If you're concerned about the economy, the job market, or healthcare coverage, the great replacement theory provides you with someone to blame.
This has been incredibly successful with fear mongers, right? You'll see Tucker Carlson talking about how, this town doesn't look the same as it used to look.
In the year 2000, Hazleton was less than 2% Hispanic. Today, thanks to mass immigration, Hazleton is majority Hispanic.
When it comes to great replacement rhetoric, Tucker Carlson has faced scrutiny before. In August 2018, Tucker said that the South African government was seizing lands from white farmers because they were white.
That is literally the definition of racism.
It's a talking point that until then lived only on extremely partisan platforms on the internet. Users on white supremacist platforms like Stormfront said South Africa was committing, quote, white genocide. In an investigation, the BBC found no proof that farmers were being killed at a higher rate than average citizens. And homicides where farmers were the victims were at a 19-year low. However, soon after Tucker's segment, the President of the United States tweeted that he was ordering Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to investigate these claims. He even tagged Tucker Carlson in the tweet. Erroneous white supremacist rhetoric, echoed by Fox News, made it to the ear of the President of the United States, influencing him to make it part of our government's day job. Can you hear me?
Janik, I saw your point. I'll get to it in just a second. So the short version is, especially related to the white genocide in South Africa, right? This is coming as talking points from white supremacy and white nationalist forums on the internet and sources. And then it's being parroted / paraphrased / brought up as an issue on Fox News. Oh, look at this little bitty town. It used to be 2% Hispanic, and now it's majority Hispanic. If they're American citizens and integrating into the country, I don't give a shit what race they are. I'm sorry, Tucker. I really don't. If they come to America, they pay their taxes, they, cut their grass, mow their lawns, keep up the neighborhood, right? I don't care. I don't care whether my neighbor is Asian. I don't care whether my neighbor is Hispanic. I don't care whether he's white. I don't care whether he's black. I might care whether he keeps up his yard, right? But the rest of it's irrelevant to me. It really is. So for somebody who's claiming not to be concerned about race, you certainly seem to bring it up a lot as a concern. And then why this matters is because we had a president who's acting on this fantasy. Okay. Now, to jump back into what Janik had to say, that is exactly what this case debunks at Left Speaks. Do you think they are killed, or do you think they are trained in the academy to kill blacks at a higher rate? No, I don't think that police are trained at the academy to go target and kill black people. Okay, so that's a common conservative misunderstanding of the progressive or left position. Nobody thinks that they go to training and the instructor get up there and says, when you see a black person, you just start shooting. You just shoot them all. Nobody is saying that. What we're saying is that black people are policed more in this country, and when they are policed more than white people, the interactions tend to get violent more often, and force is used by officers more. That this is demonstrably what is happening. Like I said, I can't go through your 17-page study live on stream right now, but there are tons of sources to support this. Tons of sources to provide this. It does not matter that you can point to one study by one black guy. Yes, I'm aware he was a black gentleman who wrote the study, and say, oh, all the rest of it's bullshit. Okay? The vast, overwhelming consensus disagrees with you. Now, I will be happy to review your study, but I have seen it before. I just don't recall the debunkings off the top of my head. So if that's difficult for you, or you can't accept that, I apologize. But this isn't a BLM show today, so you'll have to forgive me. If you want to go to the YouTube channel, or if you want to go to the webpage, theleftSpeaks.com, I have an entire 2 or 3 episodes, I think, up right now on BLM. You may have to go back to season 1 to cover it. Okay? But nobody is saying that in Academy, the instructor's sitting up there going, yeah, when you see a black guy, you just start shooting. That's not what's going on. So for you to misrepresent it that way is just straw man as shit, man. At least be honest when you're trying to have a discussion. Saucy Doe, welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you joining in. I'm extremely, or I don't know that I would say extremely. I lean left. I'm progressive. Basically, I'm not going to be overly committed. Thank you for the follow as well.
The time for silence is over.
The short version is I'm going to be committed to reality. If you can show me facts and evidence and logical reasoning that move to one conclusion over the other, I'm not going to put any political ideology over reality, evidence-based positions. So to me, and all of my research and all the reading I've done and all the sources I've watched from both sides, that leads me to more and more progressive positions as I move on. Can I sum up my ideology in like one catchphrase? No, I cannot. It's going to be individually policy specific. But in general, I would describe myself as progressive left in the United States of America. At the Janik, where does violent crime typically occur? In poor areas. Crime in general tends to be in poorer areas. At Saucy Doe, right on the money. You said that as well. At the Janik's, true, who typically lives in poor areas in urban communities from Saucy Doe? Poor people. Correct. Now, that doesn't explain your question, even if I grant it on face value, why a black man who is killed by police is 50% more likely than a white man who is killed by police to be unarmed. Even if I grant like where you're trying to take this argument, you're not explaining the disproportionate use of force, not remotely. That's the problem. Go back to immigration, save this topic for next week. I agree. I agree. Thank you, Hardwood and Sock.
To truly understand what's at stake here, there's one more place that the Great Replacement rhetoric is common. In October 2018, a mass shooting occurred at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Just before the attack, the shooter condemned a Jewish-run refugee charity, claiming that they bring in invaders that kill our people, which echoes a common Great Replacement narrative. In March 2019, another mass shooting occurred at 2 mosques in New Zealand, killing 49 people. Before that attack, the shooter wrote a manifesto. Its title, The Great Replacement. Fox News did not influence these attacks, but it's concerning that rhetoric associated with extremist concepts like the Great Replacement can be heard on air. I reached out to Fox News with my argument, and they provided me with 2 statements. We will not allow voices like Laura Ingraham, Lou Dobbs, or Tucker Carlson to be censored by agenda-driven intimidation efforts from the intolerant partisan activists like Media Matters, whose only goal is to silence conservative thought they don't agree with. And through a spokesperson, Laura Ingraham said, "My comments were based on research published in the Washington Post on immigration and America's changing demographics. Attempts by left-wing media outlets to attribute nefarious motives to my remarks speaks to their intolerance and bias, not mine." Again, the only thing I'm intolerant of is unseasoned food, but at the end of the day, the language we use can have a lasting impact on those on the receiving end of it. It cannot be the case that this kind of rhetoric has this much influence.
For those of you who disagree with Tucker Carlson and have a hard time putting it into words, there's an interview that was on the Joe Rogan show, and this part really stood out to me. And it's basically what America is or really should be about.
And so when you have someone like Congressman Steve King saying, we can't replace our civilization with someone else's babies, like, what does that mean? What is that idea? It is so deeply anti-American, because the idea of America, right, is the idea that Americanness is not about bloodline. Americanness is about a shared set of values and ideas and fealty to those ideas. So the idea that someone else's, what does that mean? You know?
Well, it doesn't make any sense because this entire country is based on immigrants.
Of course.
And I guess that's just where I do not understand the concern. Whether this, city used to be 2% white or 2%, Hispanic, and now it's majority Hispanic, or whether it used to be, 20% black and now it's majority black, or whether it used to be majority white or now it's, I don't care about bloodlines. We have done this consistently throughout American history, consistently. Anytime we see a massive migration, a massive migration from any particular region of the world, there's a certain segment of the American population that loses its shit. We've had entire political parties, like the Know Nothing Party, form around this kind of stuff. We've seen it when Irish Americans came over here during the potato famine, right around the turn of the Civil War. They were called all kinds of racist names. They were equated to African Americans with the same types of slurs. There were signs posted everywhere, or not everywhere, but there were signs posted in the northern part of the United States saying Irish need not apply, right? They were discriminated against heavily because they were a population we weren't used to seeing over here. We saw this when Italian Americans started coming to the United States, and all the different slurs that were used to refer to Italian Americans, and they were all illegal criminals and all mafia members and everything else, right? We've seen this recently with Middle Eastern immigrants coming over here. We're going to ban all Muslims. It's not a Muslim ban, but that's what I ran on, right? We've seen this with Americans coming, or with people coming from South and Central America now. And ultimately, all of those previous groups have integrated into American society and made us stronger and better overall as a country. I mean, shit, I like pizza. I'm fine with St. Patrick's Day. I have no issues with anybody that, from any culture, that wants to come to our country and wants to share in those values, that sees America as a shining city on the hill and says, I want to be a part of that. That's where I want to raise my family. In a nation that believes in freedom and democracy and isn't going to judge me based on my race or my skin color, that all men are created equal. And where I'm living right now, maybe it's not so good. But you know, if I could just get there, if I could just get there, things would be better. And why? Why would I try to discourage that as somebody that lives in America now, as somebody that's proud of my country, as somebody that's served my country before? Why would I not want America to be a goal and an aspiration and a dream for somebody in another country, whether it's a war-torn country or a country that's going through a famine or a country that's being wrecked by, drug cartels or whatever the situation is? Why would I not want that person, that family, to dream of getting to America? Why would I want to close off my border and tell that person that, no, you can't be part of this dream because you're not from the right country, because you're not from the right region of the world, because we don't think your culture can integrate with ours? When we've had African Americans, when we've had Italian Americans, when we've had German Americans, when we've had British Americans, when we've had Italian Americans, Polish Americans, Russian Americans, Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, Native Americans. And all of these countries, all of these different cultures have managed to integrate and contribute to our society. Why would I want to shut down that dream? I'm going to take a break, get some more coffee. Phone line's open if anybody wants to call in and have a discussion. It's going to be about a 5-minute break, folks. I got to use the restroom because the first cup of coffee is getting to me. And I need a minute after that. Past that, we'll engage with chat for a few minutes if nobody wants to call in on the phone. And then, of course, ! Donate. Because I do agree that the problem with that there's a massive influx of children down at the border right now. And while we cannot speed up the processing, we can help them once they are processed with temporary food, temporary shelter, helping find family members that are currently in the United States so that they can get out of these facilities. Because processing is part of the problem. The other part of the problem is once they're processed, they have to have somewhere to go. So temporary shelters, all of that is of huge benefit. It's all going to be going to rescue.org. And again, I will personally be matching donations up to a maximum amount of $250. So whatever you donate, I'm going to match that. To clarify, I cap out at $250. If somebody decides to donate $250 and somebody else decides to donate $1 more, I am capped at $250. But thank you everybody for tuning in. I think this is a very important issue, and I'm trying to do the one thing that I know that I can. We already know that FEMA's on the way and everything else to increase processing capabilities, but they need to have somewhere to go when they're done. We'll be back in 5 minutes, everybody. Thank you. And we're back a little bit early, so I'm going to give everybody about 30 seconds to get back to their computers, phones, whatever you're watching on. In the meantime, I'm just going to catch up on chat. So, Rubicon1234, hey, welcome to the stream. I appreciate you dropping in. Hope you made it through the break. I'm sorry I had to go on a break right as you dropped in. Unlucky timing, my friend, but thank you for joining. Dejanik, yes, we believe in individual freedom, democracy. He's listing them right now. I don't quite know the context of that one. Okay. Hardwood and Sock is going over the same thing. Saucy Dough, okay. Toll free. Dejanik, what do you think about Kamala as the head of the crisis team? I'm going to hold off on that one for about another 30 seconds or so. And Hardwood and Sock thinks that she's horrendous as well. Let's give it about 15 seconds. That'll give Chad a chance to catch up anyway. FYI, everybody, we're going to be going for about probably 15, 20 more minutes tops. I'm already about 21 minutes over scheduled time. As always, the episodes are going to be up on the website, theleftspeaks.com. You can go to the YouTube channel. You can follow me on Twitter. All those links are down below in the description if you're on Twitch. Please don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I only stream once a week, 2 to 4 p.m., though I might jump on one of the panels on Saturday night. We will see. All right, everybody should be back by now, so welcome back. What do I think about Kamala Harris being the head of the crisis team? I don't have an individual issue with it, just on the face of it. It would depend entirely on what she does and how she handles it. Do I agree overall with the plan to bring in FEMA to help process children and help process migrants and immigrants and vet them and get them out of these facilities? Yes, absolutely. Am I Kamala Harris's biggest fan? No, I'm not. I was a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren type. Still am. That's the direction that I tend to lean politically. She would be too far right for me personally. Do I think she was better than the alternatives during the course of the election in terms of like Pence, right, who she was running against as part of the Biden-Harris ticket? Yeah, absolutely. Hardwood and Sock, making coffee 1 sec. Hey, no problem, brother. I did the same thing. Or actually, my significant other was kind enough to make coffee for me. So you are more than welcome, my friend. Take all the time you need. But I hope that answers the question on Kamala Harris. Like I said, I'm not opposed to her specifically regarding this issue. I would have to see what exactly she does. I do agree with the plan. I think it's taking them far too long to implement the plan. Oh, looks like we got a caller calling in. I'm betting that's Hardwood and Sock again. Hey, brother, you should be live. Can you hear me?
Hey, what's up, man?
Nothing much. Hey, welcome back, man. I appreciate you calling in again.
Yes, sir.
What kind of coffee? I gotta ask.
I just got the Dunkin' Donuts Keurig K-Cups, you know.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good.
Half and half and sugar.
Oh, nothing wrong with that, man. I've got the dark French roast. That's my go-to.
Yeah, I'm plain, bro. Just straight up, just regular coffee.
No worries, man. I got the dark French roast with like 1 or 2 sweeteners. Other than that, it's straight black. So what you got for us today?
Not much. I guess like my biggest thing with like the whole Biden administration right now with immigration is that he is beginning to like his administration is beginning to enact the same policy, like similar
policies. The time for
that
silence
Trump
is
has.
over. Okay.
And he's not getting as criticized for enacting those same policies as Trump was. Their concentration camps, they're terrible, and now it seems like, oh no, they're just holding facilities. When it's basically the same thing.
So one of the key differences to me, but I'm not going to disagree with you too strongly on this point. One of the key differences to me is under the Trump administration, specifically from Attorney General Sessions at the time, the policy was to separate families, right? If you cross the border seeking asylum or as a refugee or as an immigrant of any kind, per their view, you were breaking the law and you would be prosecuted for that. And as a result of it, we would have to take your kids from you and put them in a separate facility and hold them separately. Okay. My understanding is that is not the Biden administration's policy. These kids that are being held in these different facilities are crossing without any parents with them in the first place. So, like I said, I don't disagree with you entirely. I do think that, there needs to be full disclosure. We need to have cameras and reporters and everything else in these holding facilities, camps, whatever you want to refer to them as. But the difference is in the policy and how you're attacking it.
There definitely is a difference in that. I have mixed feelings about the way Trump actually did separate families. Because on one hand, you could have human traffickers coming in with children and disguising them as a family, So I think that was their major motive in doing so. Now, were there definitely innocent families that were separated for not good reasons? Yes. But at the same time, you know what I mean? It's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Well, see, there I disagree. I think you could. So even if I agreed that there was a concern about people trying to traffic children into the United States, okay, let's say that was some major concern, right? I don't think the answer is to just poof, we're going to separate you immediately before we determine whether you're a trafficker or whether you're a parent, right? I mean, we could keep everybody in the same facility and, okay, we're going to interview you separately or whatever the case is, right, to figure out if we think you're at risk for being trafficked. It's not, oh, well, hey, we see y'all all crossing the border together. We're going to send, Miss Susie, 5-year-old, 500 miles this way and your parents 200 miles this way while we sort it out. I mean, that just seems ridiculous to me.
I understand. But then if you do have them in the same facility, and they are human trafficking victims, the children might not, like during their interrogation or interview or whatever you want to call it, the children might not be willing to open up about that and be like, oh, he's not my dad, because they know they're in the same facility. And then you have that intimidation factor.
I could see that to a certain extent, but I really think it's a stretch, man. I mean, you're basically saying that, 500 feet of separation isn't enough, so we need 500 miles of separation, and then the kid's going to believe that their parents are 500 miles away?
I don't agree with the 500 miles, but if they were in, say there's basically the size of a army base, right, in the United States, and they were on opposite sides of the army base.
Okay.
Right. I feel like that could be reasonable, So while I do find 500 miles away or 200, whatever it is a bit unacceptable in my opinion. But if we're in the same facility, then you could make a reasonable argument why they should be separated, at least for the time being.
Define the time being, because to me, okay, I could see as a compromise here, right? We're going to bring in this family that crossed the border illegally or seeking asylum or whatever terminology you want to use, because I don't want to argue that part with you and distract from where we're at, right? We could do that, and then we bring them into, this military base or this processing facility, okay? And then, the kids go over here and the parents go over here, and we interview them both separately, Okay. And they both say, no, that's my dad. That's, you know, that's my son, whatever the case is. Right. How long do you think I'm supposed to keep these people separated that are both saying they're a family unit before we can believe them, I guess?
I guess I would define like my reasonable amount of time as in like no more than 24 hours.
Okay.
You know, like not even like the full 3 days that it takes that it's supposed to take.
Right.
You know, I would say like no more than 24 hours.
Okay. So you would be even more strict than the current policy, which is, I think you would agree, not remotely what Trump and Sessions were talking about doing, right?
Correct. So like Trump and Sessions were like full family separation, right?
Correct.
For the duration of the vetting process.
Even further than that, I understand. They were basically saying if you came over with, you know, children, you crossed the border illegally, we were going to, you know, prosecute you. And as long as that process took, then, you know, obviously while you're being prosecuted, you can't be, you know, you can't maintain your children, like your parental rights, right? Because you're going to be in prison or something to that extent. So therefore we need a place to store the kids.
Yeah. So I guess I would be more lenient than that, but more strict than what the Biden admin is currently doing.
I don't see how the Biden...
In a way, just because... What's that?
I was going to say, it seems like you're being more lenient than even the Biden administration is being. I mean, you're closer to where I'm at.
What's the Biden administration policy exactly in regards to family separation for duration?
They're not separating families, but, you know, everybody goes through processing type of thing.
Yeah, so I guess like I'm okay with quote unquote family separation because there's a possibility that they're not all families for up to 24 hours.
Okay, so you would be basically all right with, you know, 24 hours to make sure the kids realize that they could be safe and they could tell the truth, right? And then, you know, if you say they're really your parents, you can go back to them type of thing. I don't even know that I would consider that like separation, right? I would consider that like extended interview time or something along those lines. But I can see where you're coming from. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to that outright, at least not on its face.
Yeah, as long as it's enacted properly, which nothing the U.S. government does is, but, you know.
I disagree with that, but I understand where you're coming from. Hold on just a second. Saucy Doe, I feel that the far left is still criticizing Biden, but it's more or less centrist and left-leaning centrists that refuse to criticize Biden, at least from what I've seen or heard. I would tend to agree with that, Saucy Left. I think they do need to be more critical of Biden right now than they were, or than they currently are being, specifically related to this situation. All right, go ahead, Hardwood and Slack. Sorry about that.
No, you're good, man. You know, but that's like my biggest issue right now with, you know, the media and the establishment Democrats, you know, that are even AOC that even came out and said that there is no crisis at the border when like the empirical numbers are literally just, you know, there's a crisis at the border, you know, and like there's no hiding that, you know?
No, I would tend to agree with you on that. I think the most charitable, because I tend to be charitable to both sides, like, right. I think from our last conversation, you would agree that I try to make the strongest conservative argument that I'm aware of. Right. And I'll try and like rephrase your argument so that I understand it. So the most charitable argument that I could make for this not being a crisis, which again, I disagree with, but the most charitable argument I could make would be that historically, right, you see a huge spike in immigration rates around this time of year from the southern border of the United States. I mean, I don't know if you saw the part with the graph, but I mean, you could literally go back over the graph for the last 20 years and you see a spike like every March, April, May, June, right? It's just a given, right? We're seeing a slightly larger spike this year than we typically see, right? But this seems to be a problem that while it's high right now, historically has declined back on its own. So like I said, that's the most charitable argument I can make for it. But the short version to me is you have a lot of kids that don't have parents at the border right now. and we're behind on processing them, and they need places to go after they're processed so they can get out of these camps. I think it's a crisis. I think it's a humanitarian crisis personally. But that's the most charitable argument I can make disagreeing with my position.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, I just find it, you know, it's just frustrating when, you know, throughout I guess in 2019, the numbers were pretty high.
Yes.
But during the majority of the Trump administration's time in office, the numbers were pretty low in comparison to like the Obama era policies.
Yeah, but illegal migration has typically been declining since, I want to say Clinton. I mean, it's been going down year over year consistently when you look at illegal migration from Mexico. And to refer to Dejanic's point that Biden's probably going to finish Trump's wall, I think there's a whole lot easier, cheaper, more cost-effective methods to address migration or immigration than building a wall. I mean, I think that's asinine. And show me a 12-foot wall, I'll show you a 13-foot ladder, you know?
Yeah, but there was actually a Daily Caller article stating that the Biden administration is actually considering restarting up the construction on the wall.
I
think
I saw something about that being released, but within like 24 hours, like Biden himself had come out and said, no, that was a misunderstanding, or no, y'all didn't understand what we were trying to say correctly, and that's not the case.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see the other article. I just saw that one.
No, it was about.
I was like, you know.
Yeah, it was like 24 hours delayed, if I remember correctly.
Okay, but you know, like even still, even if that was even talked about, you know, like Trump has been demonized about this wall for, you know, 4 years. That, you know, it, and then if there is even like a hint of truth in that article, you know what I mean? Then, like, basically we shouldn't have criticized Trump. There's 4 years.
No, I disagree with that.
I mean,
you can go to a spitball session where, you know, okay, like let's say I was trying to solve any particular problem and I just said, okay, everybody, you know, I don't care how crazy the idea is, just throw out the idea, right? That doesn't mean that I'm advocating for that particular policy, right? Somebody could have just been like, oh, well, let's, you know, do this, let's do that. Let's, you know, keep building Trump's wall. Let's do this, let's do that, right? And it might not have been a serious policy consideration. On its face, I think the wall is just a terrible way to address immigration. It costs billions of dollars. You've got to build billions of dollars in infrastructure to get there. And walls just don't fucking work. Pardon the language, but they don't, you know?
No, you're good, man. But I mean, while in general, the walls don't, like, they're not 100% effective, you know what I mean? And theoretically, it's not even technically a wall, you know what I mean? It's like bollard fencing.
Yeah.
But like one thing that the Trump administration was actually doing was targeting certain areas where they know that they have a bunch of illegal border crossings. You know, like it wasn't like a blanket from sea to shining sea wall like he originally proposed.
Right. That Mexico was going to pay for, right?
Yeah. No, like anyone who believes that Mexico is actually going to pay for that wall is just nuts. But like it wasn't this like grandiose wall. You know, it was specific areas which could alleviate the Border Patrol from having to cover the entire border instead of like crazy effectively, but it could funnel, you know what I mean, where the illegal immigrants are crossing, if that makes sense.
No, I understand what you're saying. I guess, I mean, at its basic core point, I guess I just see much easier ways to solve this potential issue, right? I mean, I don't understand. Okay, so we know migrant labor, laborers that come up during agricultural season and then go back has been a thing for like forever in American history, right? Since America and Mexico existed as states, right? So why don't we just, okay, you come through here, you get your permit for, 6 months or however long the agricultural season is, right? We're going to charge your taxes on it, whatever it is, right? Here's your migrant ID number. You can come in, you can work for X amount of months, and then you can go back home, right? And then, okay, so and make that easy as shit to get, right? There's almost no qualifications you need to do this, right? Make it easy, okay? And then go to all the companies that hire migrant labor and say, okay, we're going to do spot checks, right? And if we find you hiring somebody who doesn't have this permit, we're just going to fine the shit out of you, like massively fine the shit out of you. So we take away the demand for illegal labor in the first place, right? And we've created a legal form for people to migrate across the border and migrate back south. I mean, I don't see why we need to build a wall when we can just catch it on the demand end, And Ricky, thanks for dropping by.
Yeah, but we kind of already have that with the H-2B program, though.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why don't we just massively expand it and then regulate the hell out of it from the demand end, right? Because the businesses are the ones providing the demand. Why do I need to spend billions of dollars building a wall, right, when I can address it that way? Why do I need to spend billions of dollars building a wall when I can make it easier for somebody to get like temporary residency status in the United States? Again, I'm fine with vetting them, right? But then if I go audit a business and they hired a bunch of people illegally, I don't really care about the individual guy that's, here illegally. Why don't I prosecute the shit and fine the shit out of the business? Because if I get rid of the demand, right, and I provide a legal way for people to come here and do it legally, why is that a negative? I collect taxes on the people that are over here. They're contributing to the United States economy. I know where they're at. I know who they're working for, right? I made sure the business is paying taxes. I made sure the workers aren't being exploited by said businesses because they're on the books, right? And I'm closing all the demand for illegal activity.
Yes. I do agree with you in to an extent. So like I brought up the landscaping analogy earlier.
Sure.
Because like I'm a landscaper, you know what I mean? Like I work in that industry, and believe me, I would love for the H-2B program to be expanded.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with H-2B guys and they're amazing.
Gotcha.
Gotcha. The issue is with expanding the H-2B program is like a bunch of the illegal immigrants that do come in that are here to work end up in farmers' fields, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like picking apples or whatever, and farmers cannot afford the H-2B labor prices.
Right. Which is why I said, I would be fine with some form of cheap, like workers permit type of thing, right? But you're still going to have to, pay a minimum wage and this sort of stuff. But
yeah,
if you need to hire illegal workers because they're cheaper, then oh well, tough shit. I'm sorry, I'm not encouraging illegal workers to come over here.
Of course, I mean, see, I understand that there's a place for the illegal immigrant to work, and that it's actually, I would argue that it's needed in our society to an extent. For instance, like I said, farmers' fields, right?
Yeah.
The farmers can't afford the wages required from the H-2B program, which, and if they were forced to pay them what the H-2B labor costs are, then basically our food prices would skyrocket, and that's where I see that there is actually a necessary market for them, you know what I mean, without necessarily government control. Now, if these farmers get caught, they obviously get in big trouble with the federal government.
So I don't know that the farmers get in so much trouble right now as the illegal immigrants, but I'll concede that, or not contest it rather. I don't know that our food prices would skyrocket if you just made some kind of seasonal permit program, right? With, minimum wage is minimum wage, or whatever the case may be across the state. But if I took your argument, then you should be more opposed to building a wall than even I am, right? And then to answer Dejanik's question from chat, what about Central American refugees that aren't seasonal illegal immigrants? That's one way to address just migrants, right? I would be in favor of an easier path to citizenship for the vast majority of people that want to immigrate here. And that's just me personally, right? I'm in favor of providing legal alternatives instead of and disincentivizing illegal alternatives.
For sure. No, I mean, I understand that. But I'm not for open borders either.
Well, I'm not for purely open borders, right? But if somebody wants to come over here and join this country and become a United States citizen, I don't see why I wouldn't encourage that. If somebody wants
basically, I get. What's up?
Oh, I was going to say, go ahead.
I'm trying to steelman your argument a little bit here.
Yeah, for sure.
If we go with your argument, right, with just a worker's permit where we have to pay them the basic minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, what that would advocate, what that would do would be, it would take away the H-2B minimum required wages for, the person, the individual.
No, this could be a separate program. So I'm not saying that I'm not touching H-1 or H-2 visas currently at all. I'm saying that there could be some kind of seasonal, workers permit program that you could also implement, right? And then you could massively fine people who or companies that hired outside of that program.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I don't know. I'm just trying to think of.
For instance, right? Like if you do landscaping-ish, right? Landscaping stuff, right? So let's say that you had a landscape company, or let's say you had your landscape company and there was a landscape company in town that hired nothing but illegal immigrants, right? So your landscape company, just purely based off of wages, is going to be at a disadvantage to somebody who's already breaking the law. I think you and I would agree there, right? Okay. And there's an incentive for the company that's breaking the law to keep doing it, right? Because it can offer cheaper prices and it can, undercut you and outsell your landscape stuff, right? And then there's an incentive for the illegal immigrants or the people that are immigrating here illegally to come work for that company, right? Because they have a very difficult currently path to citizenship. So their chance of, it's going to take years for them to get citizenship in most cases to be able to work for your company, right? So what I'm saying is, why can't I give that guy a temporary worker's permit to come up here and do landscaping for 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case is, right? And then the company that doesn't hire from that pool or doesn't hire people that are here to work legally, right? I fine the shit out of them to the point where it's not profitable to do it the other way. You can't do it illegally, right? I want to give a legal alternative for seasonal workers would be my point.
Okay, well, that thing kind of already exists. Some of my guys currently have work visas from Mexico, so they're allowed to come here for 9 months out of the year. So basically, they're here between March and November.
Correct.
And then they have to go back. They have to go back to Mexico for 3 months before they can come back.
Correct.
So that program kind of already exists.
Correct.
I don't know the process for applying for that. Because I haven't helped my guys with applications. They probably have to do it from Mexico, before. I
would be fine with doing it at the border or doing it at the location that you reached, to be perfectly honest. I would prefer to do it at the border, basically almost okay, you say you're, Manuel Rodriguez and you want to go here to work here. Okay, here you go. Here's your stamp. Here's your, tax ID number. Go. This is how long it's good for, right? And then, like I said, if you enforce that on the demand end, the business end, right, where we go to the businesses and audit the businesses, and if you're paying off the books, massive fines to the point where it's not profitable to pay off the books. Because if you can close the demand, then the supply will take care of itself, right? If I can't work without getting this damn permit, right, then I'm going to go get the damn permit, right? So if I get rid of the businesses that are exploiting the system, then that's going to close a lot of those illegal doors that are encouraging people to go around the system. My understanding on the workers' permits is you're right, they do exist. I'm saying we need to make it much easier to get, much quicker process to get, right? And then we need to punish or fine the hell out of the businesses that are encouraging their employees to break the law, essentially.
See, I actually do agree with that. Like, I do agree with you on that. Like, if there was an option for them to get it at the border, I would agree with that, but not if they're already, let's say, up in Colorado. If they're already up in Colorado and then they go for a work permit, I almost don't agree with that, because they've already crossed into our country illegally and then crossed state lines illegally as well. Whereas, there's not like a different charge for that, but whatever. But if they apply for it at the border, yeah, sure, I would totally be okay with that. So it's not all that different from what we have now. You're just kind of looking for a slight expansion to make it easier.
Yeah, and much more enforcement on the business side of things, because like I said, it's much easier. So just from a pure enforcement side, standpoint, right? It's going to be much easier for me to go check, 100 farm fields, right, than it is for me to chase around 100,000 people that are working across the country, right? So if I try and enforce it strictly on the business end, it seems to make a lot more sense to me. I would prefer that when people come across, they register at the border. I do recognize that it's going to take a while to this is the cultural business norm of how we do things, right, on both sides of the border. So that's going to take a while to disseminate to everybody. I would be fine initially for, X period of years, like with people getting their permit in Colorado or California or wherever they are, simply because the business that's trying to do the right thing, but still needs employees, right? If, again, Manuel Rodriguez, didn't get his permit at the border and shows up to work and that company needs to hire somebody, I'm fine with them saying, hey, you need to go down to, the immigration's office in, at this address in Tranquility, California, right? Because this is where we're working, and get your permit, and then I can hire you tomorrow. Let's go. I want to give people as many ways to get legal and get on the books and pay taxes to the American economy, right, as possible.
Okay. Well, I mean, the enforcement thing definitely exists because when I got hired at my first landscape company, they actually had it was a nationwide company that had a bunch of illegal workers.
Yeah.
And ICE had just came in and basically cleaned house, and fined the company millions, if not billions of dollars,
I would have to see the millions of dollars fine, because my experience has been, and I went to school in New Mexico, right? My experience has been, and what I have read is generally when Immigrations and Customs Enforcement comes in to enforce immigration laws, the company usually doesn't end up with huge fines, and certainly not to the extent where it wasn't profitable in the first place, right? So the people, the individual employees, yeah, they end up getting locked up, deported, sent back to wherever they came from, and then a month later, half the time the same people seem to be back, right? But the company just keeps doing what it's doing, has been my experience, right? The fine is no more than a cost of doing business, right? Because they're still profitable even after paying the fine. And that's a major problem to me.
Well, so I can send, if I can find an article, because chances are they might have paid to have the article suppressed or whatever, you know what I mean? That it not get out. But, I know for a fact, the company that I worked for, they after all that happened, they had to go through the E-Verify for everybody, and they did get fined a hefty amount of money. And then I know this of another local company in my area as well, where the government came in and basically threatened that you're not going to get any government contract from here on out. If you get caught one more time, and this company has a lot of government contracts. So, you know, there is enforcement is kind of what I'm trying to say. You know,
I would argue
it might not be as widespread.
Yeah, that was going to be my key. It's not widespread. It's typically like, in my experience, like somebody reports on the company, not like people just going around checking the companies, right? We seem to focus a lot of our enforcement like on the border, right? We're going to put all these guards on the border. We're going to build a fucking wall. We're going to put drones in the sky. I've seen people advocate for like armed drones that could stop the invaders type shit. I know you're not that guy, but that's the kind of stuff I've seen, right? And it's just like, holy shit, why don't we just like, you know, hire some inspectors to go business to business and like, you know, check people off of a list with a computer? I mean, this does not seem that difficult, especially if we provide them with an extremely, you know, easy way to hire migrant labor, right? Because you and I both agreed that migrant labor exists and has throughout our history. But anyway, I'm going to let you get in the last word, and then I'm going to wrap up because I'm already an hour overdue. So I've got a significant other and a kid that are more than ready for my attention.
Sorry, man. I always make your shows go a little bit longer.
No, it's greatly appreciated, man. I love talking to you.
Yeah, no, you know, I'm looking forward to the topic next week. If we end up getting into the BLM stuff, which is cool. I was trying to keep us on topic earlier.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, but no, I appreciate you having me on, man, and I hope you have a good one.
You as well. Thank you for calling in, and you are more than welcome, like I said, ever back on this show. I greatly appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Have a good one, man.
You as well. All right, everybody. That was Hardwood and Sock. That's his second call in, I believe it is. As always, a great guest. I greatly appreciate you calling in again. That is going to wrap it up for us today. The call will be available on YouTube probably Monday, Tuesday, somewhere in there. And then the episode itself will be available probably tomorrow on YouTube. You can also go to theleftspeaks.com. And then, of course, the donation link will be up and available until next week's show, at which point I will provide a receipt next week for the donations that were provided to rescue.org. Again, to help the kids once they get out of these camps with temporary food, temporary shelter, and getting in touch with family that may be in the United States. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I'm going to give everybody about 5 minutes of, you know, the show shutting down music in case you want to hit that donation link. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you next week.